doing. Bill, they expected a lot of these mortgages they made to default. Okay? It was in their models, a high default rate. Now, they didn't expect house prices to come down so much. That's where they got their losses. But they absolutely made these loans expecting they would have to foreclose on people and figuring they would make money on that. These are very smart, very profit-oriented people. I can assure you, if there was money in it for them, they would be negotiating various kinds of reschedulings of these loans. They don't want to do it. It's not in their interest. That's not where the money is. Follow the money. The money is where Jamie Dimon says it is. Jamie Dimon says, you ain't seen nothing yet in terms of his lobbying in Washington. He's on the record as saying this is his big initiative right now. To spend more time in Washington, more time cultivating all those relationships on Capitol Hill and in the executive branch. And you know what else Jamie Dimon said to his shareholders? To his shareholders meeting this year. He said, with regard to 2008, the year of what we regard as the greatest financial crisis, an absolute human tragedy, he said, Jamie Dimon said to his shareholders, this was perhaps our best year ever.
Think about what these banks have done. They have taken very imprudent behavior, irresponsible. They have really gambled, all right, and in many cases been involved in fraudulent activity. And then when they lost, they shifted their losses to the taxpayer. So if you look at an instrumentality like the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, they used to insure 1 of every 50 mortgages in the country. Now it's 1 out of 4. Because what they're doing is they're taking their mistakes and they're dumping them on the taxpayer. So you and I and the long-term debt of our country and our children and grandchildren, it's all at risk because of their behavior. We aren't reining them in. The laws that Congress passed last year in terms of housing were hollow. We're hollow. Foreclosures in my area have gone up 94%. And we know the basic rules of economics. Housing leads us to recovery. Housing was the precipitating factor in this economic downturn. Unless you deal with the housing sector, you aren't going to have growth in this economy.
You're both saying that the financial world, the banks in particular, are putting their interests above anybody else's interest. And they've got the power in the executive branch and the Congress to back up their demands, right?
This is capitalism, Bill. That's what they're supposed to do. They represent their shareholders. They're appointed by the board of directors to make money for their shareholders. And the way they think that they can best make money is to shape the regulatory rules around housing, or around derivatives, around everything we used to have that kept the financial sector under control has all been, washed away one way or another by their efforts, right? They make money in the boom that way, and when bad things happen, they shove all the downside onto the taxpayer. That's what they're doing their job.
It's socialism for the big banks, because they've basically taken their mistakes and they've put it on the taxpayer. That's the government. That's socialism. That isn't capitalism.
Well, some people call that lemon socialism. So when it turns out to be a lemon, it's yours, the taxpayer. When it turns out to be good, it's mine, I'm Wall Street.
Why have we not had the reform that we all knew was needed and being demanded a year ago?
I think the short-term opportunity was missed. There was an opportunity that the Obama administration had. President Obama campaigned on a message of change. I voted for him. I supported him. And I believed in this message. And I thought that the time for change for the financial sector was absolutely upon us. This was abundantly apparent by the inauguration in January of this year. And Rahm Emanuel, the President's Chief of Staff, has a saying. He's widely known for saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, the crisis is over, Bill. The crisis in the financial sector, not for people who own homes, but the crisis for the big banks is substantially over. And it was completely wasted. The administration refused to break the power of the big banks when they had the opportunity earlier this year. And the regulatory reforms they're now pursuing will turn out to be, in my opinion, and I do follow this day to day, as you know, these reforms will turn out to be essentially meaningless.
When Lincoln ran into trouble during the Civil War, he got new generals. He brought in Grant. I hope that President Obama will bring in some new generals on the financial front.
Should Geithner be fired and Summers be fired?
I don't think that any individuals who had their hands on creating this mess should be in charge of cleaning it up. I honestly don't think they're capable of it.
Let me show you an excerpt from the speech President Obama made on Wall Street last month, September. Here's the challenge he laid down to the bankers.
We will not go back to the days of reckless behavior and unchecked excess that was at the heart of this crisis, where too many were motivated only by the appetite for quick kills and bloated bonuses. Those on Wall Street cannot resume taking risks without regard for consequences and expect that next time American taxpayers will be there to break their fall.
A reality check. Not one CEO of a Wall Street bank was there to hear the president. What do you make of that?
Arrogance, because they have no fear for the government anymore. They have no respect for the president, which I find absolutely extraordinary and shocking. All right? And I think that they have not an ounce of gratitude to the American people who saved them, their jobs, and the way they run the world.
In the scheme of things, it is the Congress and the government that's supposed to stand up to the powerful organized interests for the people in Toledo who can't come to Washington, who are working or trying to keep their homes or trying to pay their health bills. What's happened to our government?
Congress is really shut down. I'm disappointed in both chambers because wouldn't you think with the largest financial crisis in American history and the largest transfer of wealth from the American people to the biggest banks in this country, that every committee of Congress would be involved in hearings, that this would be on the news, that people would be engaged in this. What we're seeing is tangential hearings on very arcane aspects of financial reform. For example, now we're going to have a consumer protection agency to help the poor consumer who doesn't understand all of this, rather than hearings on the fundamental new architecture of reforming the American financial system so that we have prudent lending, capital accumulation at the local level again, that we encourage savings and limit debt by the American people. Our country needs this. Those aren't the hearings that are happening. If you want a marker at the federal level of how serious we are to get justice out of this financial crisis, look at the FBI. Look at the number of people who are really prosecuting and investigating mortgage fraud and securities fraud. It is so small. I've been one of the members of Congress trying to increase by 10 times the agents to get at the justice issues for the American people, for companies that have been hurt, for shareholders that have been hurt. Our government isn't doing it. It's very easy to look at the budget of the FBI in mortgage fraud and securities fraud and say, how serious is the government? And until those numbers increase, we will not begin to get justice.
If we can't get reform out of this calamity, when can we get it then, given the realities you have both described?
That's the worry, Bill, right? And I'm very serious. I'm very serious about this, which is, does it take... We have elements of a Great Depression now in terms of the impact on people, okay? People losing their jobs, their homes, their health insurance.
Even though Wall Street says, well, we're past the crisis now.
Well,
profits at the banks are up, and Wall Street and the stock market is stirring.
We're out of the financial part of the crisis. We're not out of the human part of the crisis.
And we're not out of the housing crisis. The president ought to take these empty units and require his administration to broker rental agreements with families so they're not kicked out. Property values are dropping all over the country, sometimes by as much as 25%. You can do a 30-year mortgage, even a 40-year mortgage, where people have a job or even unemployment benefits if they're going to get them for another year. Well, my goodness, you can keep them in their home. Empty units do no one any good. Let me tell you what happened where I live in Toledo, Ohio. The house next to me was foreclosed. And so I called the other day. A little plaque appeared on the door of this house, and it said, $500 down, $300 a month rent. I said, what is that, a land contract deal? What's going on there? So I called the number. I get a repossession dealer in South Carolina. I said, hello, sir, what's your name? Johnny or something. I said, and what's your address? He gave me a P.O. box number. I said, now listen. I said, your property is bringing down the value of our property because you're not. He goes, lady, I get these things from the bank. And he said, we try to unload them. What are you going to offer me? This is what he's saying to me over the telephone. I don't think a single one of my neighbors knows that that home is now in possession of a group in South Carolina that could care less about it.
Just to reinforce this point, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are now government agencies. Okay? They not only hold a lot of mortgages that are in default or close to default, they're also responsible for an enormous amount of the new loans that are being originated anywhere in the country, actually. They work for the president. The kinds of proposals that Congressman Capter is putting forward are entirely reasonable and can be implemented by the executive branch, hopefully with Congress on board. Certainly at the urging of certain members of Congress, obviously. But they can do it.
So, Simon, go ahead. You were saying, what is it that scares you? You worried?
Another Great Depression.